Okay, my background with organic gardening basically comes from a very strong interest in it. I took a course at Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington a couple summers ago and learned an awful lot about organic gardening. And then about 2 years ago, I tried a 1-acre vegetable garden in South Dakota, which is quite an experience, and I learned a lot through that as well. So before we get started, I just want to get some feedback for, obviously you're interested in organic gardening. What are your reasons why? Anybody? Yes. The right thing to do, good. Okay, all these reasons and a few more are probably, it comes to be a point when I made a decision for it, is that it's more of a values type thing, and to being able to, there's an incredible amount of sense of accomplishment when you're able to grow your own food and you're able to grow healthy food. And they've done a lot of studies of trace mineral amounts and stuff like that that's shown that organic produce up against something that's grown commercially has more nutrition than regular grown stuff. And a lot of times we find out that organic stuff tastes a lot better, and a lot of you probably can attest to that as well. So I get started. I just thought it was really important that, because it's kind of a value thing that why you're organic gardening as opposed to doing it another way, maybe what is thought to be an easier way, but in the long run, if you view gardening as a source of a hobby or a sense of enjoyment, then that shoots that theory out of the water. Anyway, I've got some suggestions for some good books that you might want to write down that are, I'm not sure if some of these are probably in the library, some of them aren't, but they're good books to help you guide. One of the first things that's very important when you're considering organic gardening is that you're not so much concerned about feeding the plant, you're more concerned about feeding the soil. So all your attention is to making your soil as fertile as possibly can. And a book that I've seen that's real good is called The Soul of Soil by Gershony and Smiley. Another book that is probably one of the most newer resource books that a lot of people are seen to be following is a book by Elliot Coleman called The New Organic Grower. And he has a garden up in Vermont. And he's doing a lot of neat stuff. And he's got even a newer book on cold frame gardening, trying to extend your growing season for around the year. And there's also a book called How to Grow More Vegetables by John Jevons. And he's down in California somewhere. And he's done a lot of stuff with French intensive raised bed type stuff, where you plant not necessarily to the instructions of the seed package, because it really doesn't make any sense sometimes when they say plant 6 inches apart and 24 inches in rows. Well, if you can plant one way 6 inches, why can't you plant 6 inches the other way? So he kind of advocates that we can grow a lot more vegetables in a smaller space than you would just by following the suggestions on the seed package. And his whole thing is doing raised beds, and also a thing called double digging, which is very labor intensive, where you dig down one spot, put it in a wheelbarrow, and then you go down another 12 inches or so and loosen up the subsoil, and then transfer the soil in the next area over it, and you keep on going down the whole bed. And another book is Knott's Handbook for Vegetable Growers by Lorenz and Maynard. And one more, and I'll kind of get into this too, there's a book called Carrots Loves Tomatoes. And that book I know is in the library, and that has everything to do with what's called complementary planting, companion planting. And I have a handout that pretty much I went through and listed all the vegetables which you probably might grow, and then their companion and also their enemy. So go ahead and take a copy of that for your resources. Companion planting has a lot to do with the way plants behave around one another. They give off beneficial effects or attract certain insects, or they're deep root plants, and they may be planted to complement something that has a shallow root. like lettuce and carrots. They go good together. So when we think of organic gardening, there's basically two things, and I'll write them down, that we're concerned about to achieve organic gardening success in lieu of putting on commercial fertilizers and the like. And that is two methods. One thing to do that's really important is rotation, and the other is soil fertility. Now when we talk about rotation is something that farmers used to do before, like the 1940s, before they started monocropping things. And the reason they did that is that if you plant something year after year, the pests in the area will be attracted to that area, and they'll get used to it and exploit it very easily, and their populations will increase. But if you put something in every other year and change it, then it keeps the pest off guard. They don't know where stuff are at that they like, and the pest population never get a chance to get established if you have rotation. So it kind of ties in with soil fertility, because there's some plants that we like to grow, like there's beans and green beans and peas that actually help build soil fertility. They fix a lot of nitrogen in the soil. So a scheme that I like to do is I think of all your vegetables in 3 different categories. And those categories are heavy feeders, light feeders, and givers. And givers are like beans, any legume, and peas. Okay. For example, peas are one of the first things you can put in the garden in the year. Okay, and they fix a lot of nitrogen. They're early, so they sometimes usually, like last year, I got my peas in at Washington's birthday, and had peas like about the 3rd week in May. Okay, and then we talk about a plant maybe that's a heavy feeder, like tomatoes, that need a lot of nitrogen. You may want to plant, as soon as the peas are played out, you may want to take your real nice tomato plants that you've had inside and plant them in the same soil where the peas grew at the 1st of June. And that way the tomatoes can use the nitrogen that the peas have fixed in the soil. And heavy feeders are corn, tomatoes, squash, eggplant, cantaloupe, melons, things like that. Those require a lot of nitrogen in order for them to grow. Okay, and then everything else, a lot of your root crops, carrots, lettuce, things like that, those are light feeders. So what I sometimes do is I'll make a 3-year strategy where in one bed I might have the givers, and then another bed I might have the light feeders, and then in a 3rd bed I might have the heavy feeders. Okay, so if I grew peas here or green beans here one year, I may the 2nd year I may take my heavy feeders and go into that bed, and then the peas may come over here, and the light feeders come over here. So everything's kind of rotating around and following each other and using each other's beneficial stuff. So that's kind of the key tenet of rotation. The other, soil fertility, kind of a term that's used a lot, is what's called green manuring. And part of, like I said, the main thing is to feed the soil, and the plant will take care of itself. The plant will take what it needs. So, and green manuring is kind of a three-tiered combination, actual putting manure on, putting on cover crops, and there's one more, but I can't think of it right now. But anyway, manure, any manure like horse or rabbit manure or llama manure, any kind of manure source you can get is fine, except probably chicken manure. Which chicken manure you should probably put on in the fall, because chicken manure, once you put a little water on that, it's really hot. It's really got a high hot ratio, and it'll actually burn plants. So you need to be just careful with chicken manure, but it's fine to put in your compost and work in. Oh, and the other thing is soil amendments like compost. Compost is gardener's gold. It has so much stuff in it that's it's so good and valuable for the soil you just can't comprehend. All sorts of microorganisms and things like that that are beneficial for the soil and do a real good job for your soil fertility. Cover crops are I've got a list here. Cover crops, a lot of times cover crops you want to have the same idea like peas or beans do. Like if you had clover or something like that, you'd maybe plant clover in the early spring and then just kind of turn that in, and all that nitrogen will fix into the soil. But there's other things like buckwheat that'll keep weeds down, and any kind of a cover crop like that, although it doesn't produce food for you right away, it will in the long run, because when you turn that into the soil, one of the most important things about soil is to have a high organic matter, okay? So that the soil is alive and not dead. And a good organic matter is like 4 or 5%, and you can usually find that out if you send off for a soil test. Now, Mark, I don't know recently if you've tested the soil at mud and see where you're at as far as that to advise, you know, if we're missing any micronutrients or something like that. I doubt it just by the fact that he puts it. Okay, other types, I mentioned clover. There's something called lupin. There's field peas. Rye is an excellent cover crop. I mean, rye is very prolific here, and it'll build up really fast, and you can turn it in, and if you have problems with quackgrass and things like that, it'll knock those out as well. It'll just take over and still put a lot of organic material into your soil. Vetch, rye and vetch is sometimes used together because vetch will fix nitrogen. The rye will fix organic matter. They'll both fix organic matter, but they like to grow together because they can support each other while they grow. And if you plant them in the fall, they'll usually come back in the spring. And the same with a lot of these cover crops. If you plant them in the fall, they'll come back in the spring. And I mentioned buckwheat and also millet. Millet will withstand drought. Okay, so these things are kind of your 3 key things to keeping your soil fertility high. That's all I have for as far as structure. I think I can kind of flow out more of my what's up here in the gray matter, just if you ask some questions, and we can go from there. Any questions?
I have a question about nitrogen in the soil.
Right?
How much nitrogen is lost over the winter due to just water working through the soil from rain and snow? Is most of it lost, or is there quite a bit?
I don't think very much is lost. One thing we do know is that there's stuff beyond our control that put nitrogen in the soil, like snow. Snow has a lot of nitrogen in it. And so
really?
And also in the summertime, when there's a lightning storm, lightning will put a lot of nitrogen in the soil. So I don't know what the figure is exactly how much lost. I think if you're doing minimal stuff to build your fertility, it's not something to really be concerned about. When we talk about nitrogen, basically there's 3 things that are mostly important. Nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So these are your three big things that are absolutely essential. And there's other micronutrients like calcium and magnesium. And nitrogen is the stuff that produces really luscious growth, green growth, and healthy growth in your plants. Phosphorus is it's involved with the cycle of life and transferring energy transfer from the plant cells, and it's also a necessity for flower and fruit production. And potassium, that helps develop seed resistant and promotes tuber growth and seed growth. And then magnesium, they're part of the chlorophyll process with the photosynthesis, and calcium is does help with balancing of the pH. So those three, and calcium, magnesium, and there's other micronutrients which are very small but they're very essential. There's a few of those. I don't know them all offhand. One of them is like boron and things like that. But those three and those two others are your most important.
Do people have a chemical version of this? I mean, ordinary gardeners.
Yeah, if they go in the commercial thing, these things will be in a ratio like 26 to 1 to 1 if you buy like ortho bags of stuff and things like that. And basically all natural manure will have the same, not this particular ratio, but it'll have some ratio like that, and usually be more balanced and not so much on the nitrogen side.
The nitrogen in manure and compost is also in a different form than is usually in the fertilizers. It's complexed a little bit better, so it doesn't volatilize or leach through as quickly. It's not as water soluble, and it's not as volatile.
Right.
So it'll stay in the soil a lot longer than the artificial fertilizer.
That's a good point. When you go out east and you see farmers and they got these big white tanks called anhydrous ammonia, what they're doing is spraying on chemical nitrogen, and that stuff will immediately go through the soil, and it'll be gone. If the plant doesn't utilize it immediately, it'll be washed away. Whereas in manure, compost, and cover crops, that stuff will stay around for a while. It'll help retain soil moisture, so it's so much superior than anything you could buy with commercial.
Doesn't that chemical stuff cause instant growth, like really lush, fast growth?
So does manure and compost.
But then again, you have to be concerned sometimes about the plant life. You could get this real growth thing real fast, and all of a sudden 6 weeks later, when you need it to produce the tomatoes or the fruit or the vegetable, it's gone. It's been leached out of the soil or whatever.
I've had that happen with huge strawberry plants, and then they didn't produce any. They were beautiful plants, but they didn't produce any fruit.
Mm-hmm. Do you have strawberries now?
Yeah.
Okay, it just makes I'm going to go through my notes here, and there's all sorts of little tips that I know that help gardening. For strawberries, the thing that they really like is a pine needle mulch, because they love acidic soil. So that's another I guess a third area that I've really subscribed to is mulching. I'm really a firm believer in mulching, because the benefits of mulching is that it keeps the soil moisture at an even level. It keeps the weeds down. You don't have to water as much, and eventually that mulch will break down and contribute to your organic matter. Any other questions?
John, if I put a pine needle mulch on my strawberries today, how long will it take before they know that the soil is acidic? I mean, is it days, weeks, months?
I would say, depending on how much rain and how fast, how much water is on the needles to break it down to pull the acidity off of the pine needles. You're looking at a few weeks probably.
And raspberries? Same rule of thumb?
Raspberries, they've done some studies on raspberries. Raspberries actually love grass clippings and sawdust mixed together.
I have a question about manure.
Right?
How do you feel about, you said any kind of manure would be good, which I think as far as nutrients it would be, but what about if you're getting steer manure or some type of manure that they've been chowing on crops that have had pesticides or chemical fertilizers and things like that? I'm just curious how much of effect that would have as far as wanting to organically garden.
Well, you could look at it from the larger perspective of your own values and not wanting to contribute to that. Some things pass through. For instance, in this area we have to really watch out for our horse manure because some of the fields and some of the grass are sprayed with Tordon, and Tordon will retard plant growth, and you won't even get a good plant growing. So, it's some of the things are broken down in the body of the animal, but others are persistent and last longer. I don't believe it, but I don't subscribe to it. I know it's probably true that things like there's safer. There's a continuum from one ideal organic, and then the other totally chemical and spray, just because the television commercial tells us to spray. There are people in the middle that will only spray when necessary, or they say that Roundup isn't as bad, and it goes out of the soil. I mean, it doesn't. It's not as toxic as some other chemicals, and that kind of ties into the fact of this other concept in regard to pests called integrated pest management. And a lot of fruit farmers and things like that, they'll listen to nature and figure out when just the right time is, or they'll let off like what we, as home gardeners, we would like to see ladybugs in our garden because they take care of aphids and things like that. On a larger scale, farmers will let out a whole bunch of praying mantis or something like that that'll take care of the pests. And so if you plant extra, you plant a little bit for the pests, a little bit for the birds, because we're all in this balance of life together, then there should be enough for you. But I picked up this in, it's a recipe for a homemade pesticide, and it includes 3 onions, 1 whole garlic, 2 tablespoons of hot red pepper chopped, 1 tablespoon of soap, and 1 quart of water. Some people have also had some success of just trying to drown them, trying to spray at them, and drowning them.
Drown the potato beetles or just drown the...
Drown the potato beetles.
Never you find out.
Refreshments that I kind of gathered from a marketing standpoint. When you harvest, it's best to harvest early in the morning or late in the evening. And I would immediately put whatever you plant into a tub of cold water and let it sit there for an hour or so.
You mean whatever you harvest?
Whenever you harvest, like say sugar snap peas. The purpose there is to take the field heat out of them, and then they'll last a little longer, and they'll be fresher longer. And the thing with sugar turning to starch, specifically when we talk about corn and sugar snap peas, it's almost like you need to eat it on the vine if you want to get sugar, because as soon as you pluck it off, you lose your sugar and it turns to starch almost immediately, within the first hour or stuff like that. So a lot of times, if you ever see me in a garden, I'll be down on my hands and knees eating the sugar snap pea from the ground.
Before you even pick them, right?
Right.
John, I have a question about watering. How do you know how much is enough water to give a garden?
Okay, the rule of thumb is 1 inch a week. And if you were east of the Mississippi River, you get that naturally. But out here you don't. So what you have to do is estimate, and the way you do that a lot of times is get a coffee can, sit out the coffee can there, and you have your sprinkler going, and when there's an inch of water in it, you stop. What's that? 1 inch a week. Right. And then you can wait 2 weeks sometimes. If you've got mulch, you can wait 2 weeks and then give it 2 inches. But another thing is that when if you've got like open soil and you've got your handheld watering like this, if you pull the water away and you count to 3, and it hasn't gotten rid of that shininess yet, that sometimes when you're watering you'll see, and it just kind of stops and it absorbs in real quickly, and before it starts to form puddles. But usually people have a tendency not water enough, and that sometimes can do more damage than watering too much, because it'll form like a crust on the layer of the soil, and then the soil won't be able to breathe as well.
Guy picked all the rocks.
So I have a question.
Okay.
My mother uses, not, I don't know if it's organic or not, tell me, rubber tires around the tomato plant.
I like tires myself because it kind of solves a pollution problem.
Yeah.
And tires absorb the heat too, and they work as a mulch too. There was a guy that had a one potato plant, and as the potato grew, he kept putting soil on and putting a tire on, and the tires were this tall, and he got 150 pounds of potatoes out of that stack of tires. So the residual effect off the water and off the rubber tire, I don't know if there's been much scientific studies done on that or not. There might be some problems with that. Same problems with stuff like, well, a rain gutter on this building wouldn't be so bad because there probably wouldn't be residual on the metal. But on this, you've got a little bit of oil and sand from coming off the thing. But I'm a believer in harvesting water. So maybe the solution would be to harvest that water and just water the flowers with it. You know, if you're concerned about it.
Unless they're edible flowers.
Right.
The only problem I've seen with those tires is the water collects inside and gets the mosquitoes going. So they're really a pain for that.
Mhm.
It's very hard to get the water out of there.
Right. Another thing, early in the season, if you have any type of greenhouse or start your plants inside, it's a good idea if you're gardening in Missoula to start your tomatoes and your squash, the things that take a long time to produce, inside. Mix up a potting soil mix, and I've got another handout here that's got a recipe for compost and potting soil if you want it. And but a lot of people, Elliot Coleman's really big on this if you're going to do a lot of stuff. It's not really particular for small people, but they have what's called soil blocks. It's a little metal contraption that you just kind of dig in your potting soil mix and you compact it, and then you squeeze it out into your tray, and then you plant your seeds in those little things, and you don't have any individual plastic things. And the air around the soil block, you'll get more uniform, better growth with it. So soil blocking is something that a lot of organic gardeners do. Well, let me start from the beginning. You've got your tomato plant, okay? And because potatoes like warm soil and you want to have tomatoes at least by the 1st of August, and the soil is a little bit cool still along about the time when we should be putting it in the ground, you want to take your plant, this is your plant right here that you've been growing inside, and you want to take this plant and you want to find your bed where you're going to put it, and take the scoop of dirt out and then lay the tomato plant almost horizontally, okay? And you bury it almost all the way up here because the stem right here will take on roots as well. And if you lay it horizontally, the top 3 or 4 inches of the soil are warmer, and when it gets going, it'll establish a broader root base to it, okay? So, okay, and then you've got your tomato growing. You want to prune it so you have just 2 main leaders, okay? And then oftentimes you'll have something that comes off or something like that, and you'll have what's in the middle here called a sucker. You want to pinch those off and you'll get better growth. And you want to thin your blossoms to about 4 or 5 blossoms per branch. Sometimes you'll see 6 or 7 or 8, but you want to thin it to maybe 3 or 4.
Is that when they're still in the flower stage or after they have little tomatoes?
In the flower stage. And tomatoes need support, and support can be those wire cages, or they can be stakes that you tie up, or any other innovative measure you want to support them. If you're setting in a plant that's this big towards the 3rd week in May, you should be able to have good tomatoes by August.
Do you have a favorite variety?
No, I don't. Peas, another tip about peas is when you make your trench to put your peas in, put a little wood ash at the base of that, and that helps peas a lot too. That reminds me of carrots too. Carrots have very small seeds, so it's difficult to, a lot of times they'll have like tape they sell in some of these commercial packages of carrots to thin it for you. But I found that if you look to see how much seed you got and how much it covers, and you put that in a cup and you mix it with sand, and you mix it all up, and then you take the cup and sprinkle it along the whole length what the carrots should cover. The idea of rotation is a good idea, and if you wanted to go all out too with that companion planting sheet I sent out too, is to try to work up a scheme where you rotate, but also you don't plant something in that didn't like anything from the year before. I don't know what the residual effect, of companion planting is per se, or how far away. I would say that if something doesn't like one thing, you should keep it one bed away from each other. I suggest that when you plan out your garden, if at all possible, is to have your beds like you do here in the backyard, have them running them north and south, and try to plant your crops north and south too. It's small, but it's significant as far as sunshine factor, because when the sun comes up and stuff like that, there's less shadows, and you've got north and south running bed, the plants will get more sunlight throughout the day.
Make a difference, because I think of like the shadows. If I planted corn over here, it would shade everything else. Would you get any tips there?
Right. That's I always put corn on the north side of the garden, tall stuff, and the short stuff in front. That makes a difference.
I was trying to.
Of course, sometimes it may be beneficial. I don't know if corn and spinach like each other, but if you had corn a little bit in and you had spinach on the north side, then maybe your spinach wouldn't bolt when you've got 16 hours of sunlight a day. When you've got your tomato plant ready to put in the ground, you need to pick a day that's cloudy and cool and not very windy, because the little roots are very fragile, and you want to do it on a cloudy, cool day or in the evening, so the sun doesn't, it's real harsh. And in addition, when you've got transplants, it's a good idea to, instead of, you've got it inside all the time and then you take it outside and you plant it. What you need to do is a process called hardening off, where on a nice day like today, before May 18th, you'll set it outside, so it can get exposed to a little bit of wind. If it's a nice warm evening, you know it's going to be in the upper 40s, let them sit out in their trays, okay? So they just get kind of acclimated to the environment, so it isn't such a shock to them. It's going to be a shock anyway to transplant them, but it's a good idea to do that. And you need to water it sufficiently immediately after transplanting. Also, I brought some organic magazines too if you want to take, and you can take those and have those. And then I've got some books here that I put my name and address in, and you can take them as long as I get them back before August 1st.